My prior two video essays covered niche topics, an unpopular secondary game mode from a 4-year-old Star Wars title, and an almost decade-old free-to-play MechWarrior title. Writing arguments for Starfighter Assault and MechWarrior Online were safe endeavors, smaller audiences, familiar sentiments, and reasonable counterpoints. Writing about Battlefield, though, intimidates me. Larger audiences, tougher crowds, louder voices, and more polarized opinions. Although we bemoan AAA game journalism's shallow and inconsistent opinions, I have begun to sympathize with the industry's equivocal takes. They are, after all, trying to retain monetized audiences. My channel remains ineligible for YouTube's partner program, so I don't have any monetization to lose. And because I have nothing to lose, I can afford to roll the dice and gamble. This video essay will be incredibly critical of the Battlefield franchise. I don't hold many credentials, and what I do hold is ultimately valueless, but I should declare them before desecrating this beloved franchise. Battlefield 2 was the second game I sunk significant teenage hours into. And I also used to be a Battlefield content writer on a website. That website was GameReplays.org, a website primarily for the sharing, reviewing, and discussion of real-time strategy game matches. I frequented the website studying the first game I sunk significant teenage hours into, Company of Heroes. I ended up, however, writing for GameReplays.org's Bad Company 2 section. It read and felt like a teenager writing content for a website because it was a teenager writing for a website. I started my senior year of high school under the screen name Sierra Hotel. Teenage me read somewhere that Sierra Hotel meant pilots were arriving shit hot. It's not my username anymore. Dumb screen name aside, I remain fairly proud of my teenage content. My brother and I at the time jumped between Battlefield 2 and Bad Company 2. Battlefield 2's allure, a larger sandbox with more tools, couldn't be replicated on Bad Company 2. It was, though, clumsy and sometimes slow to develop. Bad Company 2's allure, a modern shooter with a higher guarantee of action, could not be replicated in Battlefield 2. It was, though, limited and sometimes too sweaty. We would get frustrated or bored with one title and immediately switch to another, often ad nauseum. But of this pair of Battlefield 2s, most folk default to or assume reference of Bad Company 2. It seems we've largely forgotten Battlefield 2, and the entry before Battlefield 3 is usually remembered as the battlefield with the tracer dart. Although it saddens me, I do understand why. Battlefields 2, 2142, Vietnam, and 1942 were clunky old PC titles that ran on the clunky old refractor engine. Call of Duty 2 and Battlefield 2 were both released in 2005, and the differences proved stark. DICE's new engine, Frostbite, closed that gap with Bad Company 1 on console and Bad Company 2 on PC. Frostbite heralded a new generational wave of Battlefield fans to a modern, faster-paced, and largely more accessible set of Battlefield titles. We needed and desperately welcomed Frostbite. Battlefield 1943 would have been the PC's first taste of Frostbite, but it was delayed for almost 3 years straight until an outright cancellation in 2011 to make way for BF3. So when Bad Company 2 rang our doorbells, we beckoned Frostbite in and promptly shut the door on our elder refractor relatives hobbling up to join us for dinner. And that's embarrassing, because the refractor Battlefield titles were great. You see, Battlefield 2 and 2142 remain great entries because they improved upon their ancestors, Battlefield 1942 and Battlefield Vietnam. There's a developer interview out there in which DICE acknowledged observing players in 1942 grouping up on their own. So, for Battlefield 2, the developers installed a system that formally allowed players to join a squad. Once in that squad, everyone's colors changed to a recognizable green, and they could all use their squad leader as a spawn point. That pattern of improve upon was interrupted with the introduction of Battlefield 3. And although Battlefield 3 was a successful and fondly remembered title in its own right, the Frostbite Battlefields haven't been good sequels. Good games, bad sequels. I consider Bad Company 2 to be a great Battlefield title, but only because it was a title developed in parallel. It wasn't a proper Battlefield entry. The other great Battlefield title, Battlefield 2 and 2142, I still consider the developmental zeniths. Every subsequent Frostbite Battlefield has been, ultimately, disappointing. I'm arguing that Battlefield 2 remains the series' zenith, but the audience can consider 2 and 2142 as a packaged deal, the generational zenith of Battlefield. The differences were more tuning than anything, but the pillars of game design that lifted these titles so high are shared. Additionally, I never played Battlefield 1 and I cannot include it in this review. I will acknowledge it is a revered entry with positive sentiments surrounding it, but I also know that Battlefield 1 never addressed the deficiencies you will hear about. I also have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Battlefield 2 was clunky. Jumping, shooting, mashing the 9 key to deploy a parachute, ascertaining which pixel was the aim down sight's center point, it wasn't always pleasant. It wasn't until the title's final patch, 1.5, that the hitboxes actually matched up with the client models. Even at maximum settings, the draw distance was artificially limited. You could literally slip away from enemy players by backing up or flying away far enough. But even after trudging through an absolute bog of clunk, Battlefield 2 still produces a level of magic its sequels never captured and improved upon. Although the gunplay, the audio design, the art direction, and the movement mechanics were all far improved upon in Frostbite-era Battlefields, the Battlefield moments and magic were lesser. The experiences in Battlefield 3, 4, and 5 felt unyieldingly hectic, chaotic, and reactive. I do still enjoy my time in Frostbite-era Battlefields, and you should too. But I don't hold very many good memories with it. I still remember, fondly, the Battlefield 2 memories I made over 10 years ago. Those eternal Battlefield 2 memories were thanks to 4 game design pillars. Pillars that Battlefield 2's sequels either neglected, misinterpreted, or just forgot. First, Battlefield 2 encouraged team play and cooperation, especially with randoms. It also gave players the important tools at the start. It offered players plenty of things to do and ways to contribute, and it provided a large variety of quality maps with their own character and charm.
War never gets old, but it does have some protocol. The first rule of warfare is get organized, so it's not surprising that the overwhelming focus of Battlefield 2 is teamwork.
Adam was right. Battlefield 2 was designed entirely around teamwork and empowering players to group up and play with each other. The levels of coordination, communication, and cooperation achieved in Battlefield 2 with random internet strangers has still not been replicated or improved upon by the franchise, loosely related mod spin-offs not included. When I argue that the magic and moments were better in Battlefield 2, it's largely because they were deeper and more unique experiences. It wasn't just a series of rendezvous, incredible stunts performed by one player, uploaded to Reddit. They were these experiences that were performed by multiple players, a theater play more so than a solo recital. I credit 2 major ingredients in this magical team play and cooperation with random's achievement: the kit design and the communication tools. Battlefield 2's kit design produced several specialized options, and everyone depended on each other because of it. Player and vehicle health did not regenerate, so you needed a medic class to heal or an engineer to repair. There was no ammo pool, rather you had a finite number of reloads, so you needed a support class or a commander supply drop to continue reloading. Not everyone had access to anti-armor gadgets, so you needed your anti-tank, your special ops, or friendly armor players to deter enemy armor. Sprinting was limited and spawn points were generally farther apart, So you needed transportation players, and they existed. Every server had a handful of players who were happy to fly helicopters around playing Battlefield Bus. Spawn options were also limited to your bases or your squad leader, so you needed to keep your squad leader alive for advanced spawns. Reconnaissance tools were reserved for the commander, so you needed your commander to spot anything more than just a guy on the hill. Everyone relied on each other in Battlefield 2 because everyone needed each other. But that changed drastically beginning in Battlefield 3. Now, player and vehicle health regenerated, so you did not need a medic or an engineer class to heal or repair. Your ammo was pooled with infinite reloads, so you did not need a support class to continue reloading. Almost every class had access to C4, so you did not need anti-vehicle players. The engineer class was the default for most anyhow. Players had unlimited sprint with more clustered spawn points on the maps, so you never really needed those semi-dedicated transportation players, the players who wanted to play Battlefield Bus or Battlefield Taxi. Spawn options were broadened to squad members, radio beacons, and team-wide transport vehicle spawns, so you did not need that squad leader for your advanced spawn. Reconnaissance tools were given to everyone in the form of 3D spotting, so you did not need a commander or even a dedicated recon player for any kind of intelligence or spotting. These changes all enabled an excessive degree of player autonomy and independence. Nobody needed each other in Battlefield 3 and onwards. Players generally spawned in on whatever spawn point or squad member or transport vehicle that was closest to the action, and then ran off lone wolfing it. The kit design in Battlefield 3 and 4 meant that you could continue to heal, reload, deter armor, and spot and spawn entirely independently. The spawn changes specifically contributed to that unyieldingly hectic, chaotic, and reactive experience we all felt. This meme. And that everyone's constantly somehow on your flank feeling. It transformed the far more interesting puzzle fights in Battlefield 2 into far less interesting independent reaction fights that we know today. The interpersonal interactions felt shallower, and those moments were often shorter because of the fast-paced cycle of Frostbite battlefields. Your contributions felt lesser, and your squad mates' contributions certainly also felt lesser because you could have done it anyways. And on the odd chance that your group of random internet strangers did decide to stick around, Frostbite battlefields hamstrung you from cooperating and communicating with them. One of Battlefield 2's best design elements, an element that was never replicated in earnest in the Frostbite battlefields, was how it empowered those random internet strangers to communicate and cooperate without microphones. That invisible force of dependency that kept players together in the kit design was further supported by a very clever and successful communication tool, both for those with and for those without microphones. For those with a microphone, Battlefield 2 had a solid voice-over IP system that allowed squad mates to chat with each other and allowed a commander to speak to his team.
Control restored. Well done.
For those without a microphone, there was the Comoros system. By holding Q, you could spot an enemy, respond yes or no to questions, ask for health, ammo, or a ride, and so much more. If you are a squad leader, you could hold T and ask for artillery strikes, supply drops, UAV scans, or even just orders from the commander. It was all dead simple, articulate, and easy to hear over the in-game sound effects. Even theoretically, if you were deaf or hard of hearing, there were strong and clear visual cues describing a player's needs. A little voice line typed out in chat, some flashing icons on your screen, and matching minimap pings supporting the audio cues. It wasn't always effective. The "give me X" memes were true back then. But it was so easy to use and comprehend. Battlefield 3 didn't have PC voice over IP. Ever. The on-screen text, player tag flashes, and minimap alerts were all drowned out in favor of a prettier UI element that screamed form over function. And although Battlefield 4 provided an in-game voice over IP, the comma rows flaws were the exact same. The neutered comma rows system and voice over IP mistakes took squads of players who already didn't need each other and were already spread out lone wolfing it because they didn't need each other, and effectively isolated them from one another. Whereas Battlefield 2 kept players together and communicating, the Frostbite battlefields have spread players out and largely isolated from one another. The few remaining cooperative necessities, player revives for example, weren't always available at the start. Battlefield 2 gave every player the most important tools at the start. There were upgrades, sure, but they were usually niche-use loadout side grades. The sniper kit option allowed you to shoot through an aircraft cockpit at the cost of a worse scope and handling characteristics. An assault kit option traded smoke grenades for flashbangs. An engineer kit option traded the shotgun for a small submachine gun, but the medic kit always gave you the defibrillator. And that wasn't the case in Battlefield 3 or 4. You had to first unlock the gadget that defined the class. You could not invite friends to try out Battlefield 3 or 4 without first telling them they'll have to grind a little bit before being able to revive you. The engineer kits couldn't defend against aircraft with Stinger missiles until they unlocked them first. I can't tell you how many times I've hopped on with friends full of creative ideas, only to be disappointed when they inevitably respond with, "I haven't unlocked that gadget yet." The Frostbite battlefields tended to cockblock fun with friends. In Battlefield 2, you had unlock tokens. You got to pick and choose which kit you'd unlock after a certain amount of XP. Yes, there was grind, but you had the important tools from the start, and you could pick the unlocks you wanted first. Vehicles too were gimped from the start. For a while, Battlefield 3 only gave players a jet with the cannon. No flares, no missiles, no nothing. Your first several attempts in an aircraft, perhaps several hours, were spent eating missiles uncontested because the game wouldn't give you the basic defensive tool to play the game. It was addressed later in a patch, but vehicle feature design in Battlefield 3 and 4 felt like a huge missed opportunity. Even when you unlocked all the features in a vehicle, you still had to choose in a fairly rudimentary this or that create a class system. And the options presented were odd. In Battlefield 3, you had the choice of IR sights, zoom sights, or IR smoke. So you could choose a tool that would highlight things at short range for you, a tool that would help you see farther, or the primary defense tool for armor. The Battlefield 4 system made more sense, but it begs the question, why couldn't we have had access to all of the tools? Much of the vehicle gameplay in Battlefield 3 and 4 boiled down to a who has what loadout-based rock-paper-scissors fight. It was less so up to player creativity and skill, and more up to who had the correct loadout in that given situation. The real shame here is that Battlefield 3 and 4 did a decent job of adding cool mechanics and features. Tanks, for example, went from 4 features, main gun, coaxial gun, smoke, turret gunner, to this list of mechanics. But even with this laundry list of mechanics, we never really deviated from the Battlefield 2 main gun, second gun, defense button, turret gunner formula. In many of the fights, the tools that you really wanted just weren't there. The resulting loss usually meant that you'd go to the vehicle customization screen, adjust the loadout, and spawn back in. If players were expected to switch loadouts mid-game, why not just give players all the tools at the start? More new player tools are ultimately useless if there's not much to do with them. And in Battlefield 3 and 4, there were less things to do. Sure, there were tons of new gadgets, tons of new ways to fight, tons of new weapons like laser-guided missiles, deployable machine guns, player UAV tools, and thermals, but there was less to fight over in traditional conquest matches. Battlefield 2 was an environmental smorgasbord of objectives in comparison. In addition to the traditional taking and holding points, there were plenty of sub-objectives to consider and fight over. The biggest and best example was the Special Operations gameplay. Each team's commander had assets available: satellite dishes, UAV stations, supply drops, and artillery. These assets were powerful. UAV scans turned fights, supply drops kept armor columns together, and artillery strikes were devastating. Losing fights because of these assets was brutal, but if you didn't like them, your squad could go destroy them. You could sneak behind enemy lines in a boat, halo jump from a high-up helicopter, or drive around the edge of the map to the enemy spawn and sneakily destroy those assets. Or you could be the squad defending against those attacks and repairing the assets. This game within a game was incredibly fun and rewarding. Capturing points gave your team new spawn points and vehicles, yes, but sabotaging commander assets hamstrung the enemy team so much more. It was one of the most fun player experiences offered, especially sneaking onto the USMC carrier and sabotaging assets and vehicles. There were no protected spawn zones in Battlefield 2. You could infiltrate enemy bases and wreak havoc. Things got tense and exhilarating trying to survive or escape. It was a ton of fun. But it was a ton of fun that was completely absent in Battlefield 3 and 4. None of these sub-objectives were replaced or reimagined. They were all just absent. And to an extent, so was the commander role. Another piece of Battlefield 2 magic was a player commander. The commander could be as passive as simply taking and serving UAV or artillery requests from squad leaders, to as active as issuing out warnings, updates, and orders to the entire team via the built-in VoIP and comma rows. Battlefield 3 didn't even attempt a commander mode. No voice over IP, no commander assets, no commander. Battlefield 4, to its credit, tried. There was a commander mode, and for a while it was available to play through a mobile app. You could theoretically command on the commode. But DICE missed the mark here. The UAV tools available were largely redundant because of how easy it was to 3D spot other players. That and recon players could do the same thing with the MAV, a similar tool with more longevity and capability. The only offensive tools available were, depending on the map, a cruise missile strike or a call-in AC-130. And that availability was dependent on if your team held the relevant control point. Even then, the cruise missile was nowhere near as powerful as Battlefield 2's artillery strikes, and the AC-130 wasn't flyable. It flew in a predictable and very vulnerable pattern. It never lasted long. Commander vs. Commander fights too often ended up in that tic-tac-toe game theory meta. You could always force draws on another. UAVs and cruise missiles could always be countered by each other. And that's a shame, because commander influence in Battlefield 2 made the matches so much more personable and memorable. Many of the Battlefield 3 and 4 map designs were memorable, but some were memorable for the wrong reasons. The unyieldingly hectic, chaotic, and reactive gameplay elements were further exacerbated by the removal of Battlefield 2's view distance limitation. Battlefield 2 has always been about large-scale battles with 64 players, but that chaos was controlled and segmented because of that view distance limitation. Players fought in bubbles. You could only be engaged from so far away. Any farther, and things de-rendered. It controlled how many threats you could deal with at once. Combined with the more concentrated spawn options, fights felt more digestible and solvable. The bubbles could consist of squad versus squad, all the way up to team versus team. And that variation is what made each experience in Battlefield 2's maps feel different. With the view distances now unlimited and spawn options multiplied, players became at risk and under fire from infinitely more angles and ranges than ever before. I want to explain this issue further, and this portion will feel slightly different from the rest of the video. Here's a clip from Battlefield 2. My settings here are absolutely maxed, and I am running on a higher resolution than the game was ever really envisioned with. Here I am on Gulf of Oman, and here I can see the view distance threshold. It's about 400 to 420 meters, and you can see the render distance bubble that I mentioned earlier. The Battlefield 2 bubbles are these 800-meter diameter maps essentially within the map. The bubble controlled the amount of threats and the ranges of those threats. Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 don't have these view distance bubbles. We can see well past the 400 meters now. Removing the view distance bubble was the right call. The addition of all-kit 3D spotting to these new view distances, however, was not. Here I am in Battlefield 4's Gulf of Oman. Battlefield 4's Oman was unique in that it featured a visibility-reducing dust storm. What we're seeing here is actually Battlefield 4's Oman's view distance minimum. The render distance remained, but the storm made it difficult to discern differences between features. The minimum here is still more than Battlefield 2's view distance maximum. At roughly similar positions, these two screenshots make that clear. It's even more clear when we look at Battlefield 3's screenshot. I can't see the fine details at the A point 200 to 400 meters away, but I can see the muzzle flashes, vehicles moving, and the overall situation over there. The view distance affords me information about what is over there. It doesn't on its own tell me individual player positions, movements, etc., not without optics. I'm currently not a threat to those guys 200 to 400 meters away, until I get this 3D spot. The player I got here, I could not see, track, or hear. I wasn't shooting at an enemy player, I was clicking on a triangle. That's a dangerous tool to give players, especially with these new, very accurate weapon designs and view distances. All-kit 3D spotting is what abused the new draw distances and turned a wonderful expansion of player freedoms into an oppressive governor of player freedoms. This change effectively gave players the ability to get anyone anywhere without any real work. We all spammed the Q button, hoping to find the guy over there, and we did it because it worked. The all-kit 3D spotting is what I mean when I argue that players were under attack from infinitely more ranges and angles. Where the 3D spotting contributed to infinitely more ranges of attack, the spawn options contributed to infinitely more angles of attack that the players were susceptible to. In Battlefield 2, you had a danger radius of about 400 meters and generally fewer angles of attack to consider for. Much of the time, angles of attack were usually base-to-base static angles of attack. The flexible angles of attack, squad spawns, were limited. Squad leader spawn meant that only 1/6 of a squad could serve as a spawn point. Battlefield 2's squad cohesion 2 meant that deviation from that additional flexible angle of attack was limited. In Battlefield 3 and 4, you had exponentially more angles of attack. The flexible angles become overwhelming. Squad cohesion was poor, remember, nobody needed each other, and squad spawn options sprawled all over the map. In some cases, you essentially chose where to drop on the map, a la very popular Battle Royale systems. Addition of the team-wide spawn points too meant that helicopters and boats could dump half of the team somewhere on the map. Combined with the longer ranges and the all-kit 3D spotting factors, you end up with lots of these unyieldingly hectic, chaotic, and reactive experiences. And that is not an improvement, especially when these experiences become the norm. It becomes exhausting. And those exhaustive, unrelenting experiences were compounded further, often because of Frostbite Battlefield's map designs. Death came really often because the general design of most of the Battlefield 3 and 4 maps were rectangular, almost like a chessboard or an actual sandbox. They tended to funnel players to each other. Lankang Dam exhibited terrible vehicle boundaries and capture point spacing that exacerbated the new view distance expansion. Each team's spawn was in range of each other. The AA vehicles routinely shot down helicopters from their own spawn, and there was very little space for the helicopters to go anyways. The middle island point 2 was within range of both teams, and therefore under constant unyielding bombardment from both.
Sharkey Peninsula played largely the same in Battlefield 3 as it did in Battlefield 2, credit to good map design. Except for the US attack helicopter spawn. In Battlefield 2, it spawned on the TV station roof and out of view from the other enemy spawns. In Battlefield 3, it was both in range of the enemy attack helicopter's spawn and in range from the enemy tank spawns too. Needless to say, the Battlefield 3 US attack helicopter on Sharkey was rarely seen flying. Both issues described earlier, vehicle spawns in range of each other, weren't limited to only Lankang or Sharkey either.
Flood Zone was, in my opinion, a mess. Battlefield 4 introduced lots of vertical gameplay elements. Fighting for and from skyscrapers was a fun addition that also broke up sightlines and helped segment the maps into smaller neighborhoods. But on smaller maps, the vertical gameplay elements often just divulged into a chicken chase. Even if you could fight your way up the stairs into the top, the other player always had a consequence-free option of jumping off and immediately parachuting to safety, even if it was only 10 or 20 feet down. Kaiser Railroad, although a map I did enjoy playing on, is an example of poor objective design. There was really no reason, incentive, or reward for capturing any of these points. Save for the middle point that granted an AC-130, everything else only grants a dirt bike, so you can sprint to the next point for another dirt bike. Most of the gameplay on this map divulged into this Zerg rush chasing XP and reacting to whatever was in front of you. Rogue Transmission exhibited a different issue. The hills next to the middle point were actually more valuable than the actual points themselves. That, and the point underneath the radar dish, a clever way to provide players a space to fight, safe from air elements, also didn't provide players with that much of a reward for capturing it.
The designed capture point incentives, the AC-130 or bomber call-ins, weren't well thought out either. The Battlefield 3 AC-130 wasn't a reward for the players taking the point, it was a reward for those looking to spawn in shortly after. And the Battlefield 4 AC-130 incentive was entirely dependent on if anyone was playing as commander, and few rarely were. Normal commander tools afforded in Battlefield 2 were gate-kept in Battlefield 4. The tools that attracted player commander participation were entirely dependent on if your team of lone wolves felt like playing the objectives. And when you had a team willing to capture points for you, the mediocre-powered cruise missile and predictably vulnerable AC-130 rarely felt like worthy rewards. The bomber call-in reward was only controllable by one player for a few seconds. Its availability, too, was limited to select DLC maps in Battlefield 4. Battlefield has been regurgitating a very similar formula for the past decade. Other titles are innovating. Modular damage models, resource management, base building, and dynamic maps are becoming the new norm. We only need to look at titles like War Thunder, Squad, Hell Let Loose, or even Call of Duty to see that the Frostbite Battlefield designs feel, dare I say it, frozen. Where other games like War Thunder's ground realistic battles give us the entire backyard to play in, Battlefield still feels like the lone sandbox.
Battlefield 2 was chock full of magic and memories because of its quiet time, the moments in between the action sequences where the memories were formed and shared. It was the ride into capture points, hunting vehicles in an aircraft, the retreats from lost fights, standing underneath an aircraft hangar waiting for the aircraft to respawn, waiting for a pilot to enter an aircraft so you can snipe them out, landing your aircraft to repair, deciding upon objectives and travel means with your squad, getting picked up to another travel point by a helicopter, reviving teammates after a fight, little helicopter extractions from a base raid, waiting out an artillery strike, joining an armored convoy because it looks cool, and the little squad interaction moments where you'd ask for revives, health, ammo, and a ride to the next point. There are two videos I highly recommend watching that talk about quiet time. Racevic's Modern Military Shooters Before Modern Warfare at about 32 minutes, and Super Bunny Hop's The Importance of Quiet Time. In Super Bunny Hop's video, there's a Half-Life 2 developer interview cited, and that piece is what I think of most often when I think of quiet time. In the interview, he talks about the puzzle and transportation portions of gameplay in Half-Life 2, and why they're important to have after a big action sequence. Ultimately, without those pacing contrasts, everything becomes a numbing blur of relentless action, which winds up being fatiguing and not very fun after a while. The Frostbite battlefields lack that pacing contrast. The titles are very good at stringing you from action sequence to action sequence. But it becomes relentless, fatiguing, and unmemorable, just as Josh Wire describes. What little quiet time remains is often interrupted by the new view distances, or funneled away by the chessboard map designs, or rendered kind of pointless with the limited objective designs. The Frostbite battlefields, unfortunately, have boiled down the interaction cycle to spawn, rush objective, react, and repeat. Gone are the quiet time moments planning out your personal objectives and travel paths. You're reacting to multiple hostiles from all around you, and from even further ranges away. Objectives changed hands quickly, and spawn opportunities changed rapidly. Your squad, often a broken, incohesive group of lone wolves, constantly offered you a short-term spawn opportunity all around the map. The interactive cycle was interrupted so often by the game's unyieldingly hectic, chaotic, and reactive game design. Sure, the moments themselves were cool, but there was so rarely the downtime to analyze it or the squad cohesion to share it. The memories weren't given time to settle. I'm confident I'm not the only one making this argument. There's evidence of developers recognizing Battlefield 2's design pillars elsewhere in Battlefield titles. Battlefield 5 gets a lot of flack, and most of it deservedly so. But when you review its game design, there is a lot of praise here. Much of the praise I have is tied to the game design decisions that do more closely resemble Battlefield 2's 4 pillars. When we look at kit design, player and vehicle health regenerated to a limited degree, which meant that you needed a medic or a support player to heal to full health. Players spawned with less than 100% ammunition, which meant that you needed a support player to replenish ammunition just a little bit more often. 3D spotting was reserved for the recon or the support classes, which meant that you needed another player to help you 3D spot. There were more tools given to the players at the start, too. Every player could revive every player, albeit slower than a medic. It meant you had more opportunities to play with friends and squaddies, and it incentivized players to stick together just a little bit more often. Battlefield 5 actually broadened the horizons with vehicle gameplay too, by introducing more variety in vehicle equipment and a new layer of modular damage. Tracks, engines, and turret rings, for example, could be disabled or damaged based on the damage received. The addition of fortifiable bases, emplaced guns, and the ability to set towed anti-tank guns to new spots gave players a little more to fight over and a little more creativity than just rushing to a single control point on Conquest. Although rare, these elements did give players a taste of the sub-objective gameplay we found in Battlefield 2. The map designs too were fairly varied. I'll toss credit, the maps do a decent job of segmenting larger servers into smaller neighborhoods. These design decisions all generally put Battlefield 5 closer to the series' roots. It's a shame Battlefield 5 couldn't commit further, because it feels so close to greatness. And it wasn't the only one that felt close. Battlefield 4 has an official server preset option next to normal and hardcore, the classic mode. No 3D spotting, squad leader only spawn, a similar Battlefield 2 reload system, and no auto heal. There's only ever 1 or 2 active servers running this preset, but most of my time spent in them felt right. Many of my qualms with Battlefield 3 and 4 weren't present in this classic preset. Folks stuck together a little bit more often because the spawn options were limited, but also because squad mates needed each other a little more. Furthermore, I wasn't constantly being flanked, sniped, shot at, or otherwise interrupted, probably because the 3D spotting was removed. The combination of 3D spotting and unlimited view distance, perhaps, is what contributed to a lot of that unyieldingly hectic, chaotic, and reactive interaction cycle of interruptions in Frostbite battlefields. Battlefield 2 ultimately felt like, and I know people hate food analogies in this, but it felt like eating sushi together after work. There was time and thought put into which piece you would pick and enjoy. Plenty of conversation and memories, but it was all enjoyed through a very clumsy process. Battlefield 3 and 4 felt like eating French fries by yourself on a beach. A simple food eaten quickly without much thought, all with your fingers easily, but under this constant interruption of seagulls trying to take what you have. That plate of good sushi is more memorable than beach French fries. I'm not thrilled that I still think Battlefield 2 is the series' zenith. But it's because Battlefields 3, 4, and 5 have failed to build upon Battlefield 2. Although they introduced several new improvements, toys, and modernizations that were all sorely needed, they failed to retain and improve upon what made Battlefield so successful. And that's why they were, ultimately, so disappointing. None of the modernizations or new toys are worth it if you can't enjoy them with others, if the grind to obtain them is arduous and upfront, if you're fighting over the same valueless objectives ad nauseum, or if the maps just funneled you away or interrupted your creativity.
Battlefield 2's development ceiling should have been the Frostbite Battlefield's development floor.
I went back and watched the X-Play reviews of Battlefield 2 and Battlefield 3 side by side. It is remarkable what they used to cram into 4-minute reviews that aired in between TV commercial breaks on basic cable. It's also remarkable how different the reviews felt. The Battlefield 2 review made comparisons to the older titles and where and how it was better.
The overwhelming focus of Battlefield 2 is teamwork, but this time your squad leader is a moving spawn point. Long gone are the days when your death resulted in a long slog over empty terrain. Coordination among teammates has been beefed up with the addition of the commander role. Communication is easier with the new radial quick chat menu. And some of the weaker soldier classes have been given a shot of adrenaline. Now your medic can resurrect dead soldiers if he gets to them fast enough. I love defibrillating. Some for you.
Battlefield 2 will make men out of you, pansies. I give it 5 George C. Scotts out of 5.
X-Play awarded Battlefield 2 a 5 out of 5 for its improvements compared with prior games, but the commentary after the review repeats a lot of what I've been droning on about.
This game is gorgeous, it's compelling, and its scope and scale are amazing.
One of the best things about Battlefield 2 is that there's a role for everyone.
You can be a team leader.
You can be a one-man army and shoot the enemy Rambo style.
You can sneak behind enemy lines and set explosives.
Cool. You can be a medic and run around healing people.
You can even be a commander, which makes Battlefield 2 into more of a real-time strategy game. Basically, you watch an overview of the battle and order in airstrikes or supply drops for your troops.
Which leads to a really incredible sense of interconnectedness with the people on your team. And I want to emphasize how cool that is. Like, you'll be running along, and just when you realize that you're out of ammo, you'll look up to see some falling out of the sky because your commander had it airlifted to you.
We can't say enough good things about this game.
A role for everyone, and an incredible sense of interconnectedness. Both of those praise points in Battlefield 2 aren't praise points in the Frostbite Battlefields. The autonomy in kit designs meant that you are a little of everyone's role and not necessarily needed for anybody. The neglected communication mediums, objective design, and game features did diminish that sense of interconnectedness in the Frostbite Battlefields. Looking at the Battlefield 3 review, I'm not really sure what they reviewed. It felt much more like a list of features from the back of the box.
Rush and Conquest modes remain the primary game types for competitive multi, and they've been honed to a wicked edge in Battlefield 3. The 9 new maps are tightly designed and have no real bottlenecks to speak of.
Are you sure about that?
It has a scope and variety that simply doesn't exist in any other multiplayer shooter.
This scope is found elsewhere. Battlefield 2 servers were alive, Bad Company 2 was alive, Frontline's Fuel of War was probably still alive, MAG was a game, PlanetSide had been around forever.
It can be tough to start out, and you'll rage as you're blindsided by players who know the map better than you. and picked off by snipers in hiding places you didn't even realize were there.
Getting picked off like that is because of the view limit increased. You're not talking about if that's good or bad or how it impacts the game.
But you'll keep playing that one more game thanks to the sheer amount of things to do and the endless things to unlock for your soldier.
Things to do, there's less to do in Battlefield 3 than before. There's no spec ops, there's no commander, there's no base sabotage. You're not mentioning any of these losses. These reviews are 5 years apart, and it's wild how game journalism changed in only 5 years, and it's disappointing that this 2010 example has been the norm for the past decade, the IGN standard. Plenty of game journalism today, too, follows this flawed logic that if game buggy or controversial, then game design bad. It's a shallow yet pervasive sentiment in AAA game journalism. Most modern games today get patched or fleshed out, and there's very little value left of at-release game reviews. But at-release game reviews are still king, but they don't ever answer the better question: is the game design good? Battlefront 2, Battlefield 5, and Cyberpunk come to mind. It's too easy to stand at the salt lick of bugs and controversy, and as a result, it took me far too long to ascertain if the game design itself was fun or not. Some of the thought leadership behind 2042 did excite me. The larger maps built for a more choose-your-own-adventure experience was tantalizing. But everything else tasted just the same, just as disappointing. So to me, I'm not surprised Battlefield 2042 was so poorly received. The criticism extends well past the buggy game is buggy sentiment. The list of missing features, or bad game design decisions, is damning. But much on that list has been around since 2011. When we examine the list of missing or misinterpreted features and designs since Battlefield 2, it's evident that 2042's demise, perhaps DICE's lowest low, has been almost a decade in the making.